When adult children don't recognize their parents' value, there exists a reality that many prefer to hide, a silent truth that hurts so much we'd rather not name it. But today we're going to talk about it with complete honesty. Not all adult children recognize the value of their parents, and this doesn't happen because they're heartless people or because they've lost the capacity to love, but because there's an emotional reality much more complex than we imagine. You may have dedicated entire decades of your life to raising, protecting, guiding, and supporting. You may have sacrificed your own dreams, your time, your energy, even your personal happiness for your child's well-being. And yet, today you find yourself facing a coldness you didn't expect, a distance you don't understand, an indifference that completely disarms you. The first natural reaction is to look for someone to blame, to point at yourself and ask again and again, where did I go wrong? Where did I fail? What could I have done differently? But this obsessive search for errors is actually an emotional trap from which it's urgent that you free yourself. The pain you feel isn't just sadness, it's a very particular type of grief, because the person you love still exists, but their emotional connection with you has disappeared, and there you are reviewing every moment, every decision, every word, trying to find that invisible crack through which the distance seeped in. But perhaps it's time to start from a completely different place, from a perspective that allows you to recover your dignity and your inner peace. First, the uncomfortable truth about filial love. There's something that society rarely acknowledges openly. The love you give has no guarantee of return, not even when it comes to your own children. This is one of the most difficult truths for any father or mother to accept, because from the moment a child is born, we unconsciously build the expectation that this love will be reciprocated, that this dedication will be valued, that these sacrifices will be recognized someday. But emotional reality is much more unpredictable. Your child may have become an adult who simply doesn't have the emotional capacity, the maturity, or even the interest to recognize everything they received. This doesn't make them a monster, but it doesn't make you a failure either. The problem arises when your self-esteem, your sense of purpose, and your emotional stability depend completely on your child's response, when their recognition becomes the thermometer that measures your value as a person. Because if that's the case, then you've placed your emotional well-being in someone else's hands, and no one can live healthily under those conditions. You cannot control what another person feels, thinks, or decides. Not even if that other person is the one you brought into the world and raised with so much love. Your personal worth cannot be conditioned by others' emotions, because if it is, you'll live on a permanent emotional roller coaster, always depending on external signals to know if you have the right to be at peace with yourself. Second, stop blaming yourself. The trap of self-recrimination. When an adult child becomes emotionally distant, most parents fall into the same psychological trap, assuming that everything is their fault. If I had been more patient, if I had set different boundaries, if I had expressed my love in another way. This constant self-recrimination is not only unfair to yourself, it's completely unproductive. Guilt is an emotional prison that you build brick by brick with each should have and each if only I had. It's a mental place where peace doesn't exist, where every memory becomes evidence of your supposed failure, where every past decision is analyzed under a merciless magnifying glass. But here's something fundamental you must understand. Being a father or mother doesn't make you absolutely responsible for all the emotional decisions your child makes as an adult. You did the best you could with the tools, knowledge, and circumstances you had at that moment. That doesn't mean you were perfect, because nobody is, but it does mean your intention was loving. Chronic guilt is actually a disguised form of control. It's as if you believed that if you punish yourself enough, if you take responsibility for everything, somehow you'll be able to change the outcome. But it doesn't work that way. The past isn't modified with emotional self-flagellation, and the present isn't improved by living in constant regret. It's time to free yourself from that burden that was never completely yours. Recognize that your child as an adult has the responsibility and the right to decide what type of relationship they want to build with you. Their choice speaks about them, about their emotional moment, about their own internal struggles, but it doesn't necessarily define who you were as a father or mother. Third, The danger of living for others' approval. One of the most destructive mistakes a parent can make is turning their child's approval into the center of their emotional universe. It's understandable, because for years your identity was built around the role of caregiver, protector, provider. But when that role becomes your only source of personal value, you place yourself in a position of extreme vulnerability. Living waiting for your child's validation is like building your house on sand. Every gesture of coldness becomes a threat to your emotional stability. Every call that doesn't come is a confirmation of your supposed lack of value. Every encounter where you feel their indifference transforms into a wound that takes weeks to heal. This emotional dependence isn't love, although it disguises itself as parental concern. It's fear. Fear of not being important, fear of being forgotten, fear that all those years of dedication meant nothing. But that fear isn't resolved by demanding more attention or making more sacrifices. It's resolved by recognizing that your value as a person exists independently of how others perceive it or express it. When you live for others' approval, you become a distorted version of yourself. You start modifying your behavior, your words, even your emotions, hoping to obtain the response you long for so much. You become someone who begs for affection instead of someone who offers it freely. The irony is that this desperate need for approval often produces the opposite effect. When someone feels that their affection is necessary for another's emotional well-being, that relationship becomes suffocating. The other person feels pressured, guilty, responsible for emotions that don't belong to them, and the distance you fear so much becomes even greater. Fourth, true love versus self-nullification. Recognize the difference. For years, perhaps decades, you built your identity around a premise that seemed noble, giving everything for your children. Every decision revolved around their well-being. Every personal renunciation was justified by their happiness. Every sacrifice was made without question, because what's important is that they're okay. But there's an invisible line between generous love and self-nullification. And crossing that line has devastating consequences. When you give without limits, when you systematically renounce your own needs, when you become someone whose only function is to be available for others, something profound breaks in the family dynamic. The problem isn't giving. The problem is disappearing while you give. When your personality, your desires, your boundaries, and your emotions become permanently secondary, you stop being perceived as a complete person. You become a function, a resource, someone who's there when needed but whose humanity becomes invisible. This dynamic generates a cruel paradox. The more you give yourself without conditions, the more likely you are to be taken for granted, not out of malice, but because you never established that you're also a human being with needs, boundaries, and the right to respect. Healthy love includes the capacity to say, I love you deeply, but I also respect myself. I'm here to support you, but not at the cost of my own emotional integrity. This isn't a selfish position. It's a mature position. Because when you don't value yourself, you're teaching others that it's okay not to value you. If for years you were someone who never set boundaries, who never expressed their own needs, who always said, it doesn't matter, what's important is that you're okay, then inadvertently you created a dynamic where your emotional disappearance became normalized. Your child learned they could count on you without having to consider your well-being, not out of cruelty, but because you yourself established that invisible rule. Fifth, freeing yourself from emotional dependence disguised as love. There exists a form of attachment that many parents don't recognize as such because it camouflages itself perfectly under the appearance of unconditional love. It's the compulsive need to be emotionally validated by your child. That sensation that if they don't recognize you, if they don't seek you out, if they don't show you affection, then something fundamental in you collapses. This emotional dependence is a subtle form of slavery, because although you believe you're loving, you're actually collecting. You collect in the form of attention, gratitude, recognition, gestures of affection, and when that emotional debt isn't paid, bitterness appears, disappointment, resentment disguised as sadness. It's crucial to understand that this isn't love, it's anxious attachment, and anxious attachment is nothing more than fear. Fear of not being important, fear of being replaced, fear that all your dedication has been in vain. But that fear isn't resolved by holding on tighter, but by releasing the need to control the other person's emotional response. The transformative question is, Who am I when my child doesn't give me what I expect? If the answer is nobody, I collapse. I become a ghost of what I was. Then your identity is dangerously fused with another person's reaction, and that's unsustainable in the long term. Real emotional freedom begins when you can say, I love my child deeply, but my well-being doesn't depend on how they respond to me. It's not coldness, it's not indifference, it's maturity. It's understanding that your emotional integrity cannot be in anyone else's hands, not even your children's. When you free yourself from that need for constant approval, something miraculous happens. You start loving from abundance instead of lack. You no longer give to receive, you give because it's part of your essence. And that form of loving is infinitely more pure, more free, more authentic. Sixth, setting boundaries without guilt, an act of personal dignity. Setting boundaries isn't an act of revenge or coldness. It's an act of self-respect that protects your emotional integrity and paradoxically can improve the relationship in the long term. But many parents struggle with this because they confuse boundaries with rejection, firmness with lack of love. A boundary is simply a clear statement about what you're willing to tolerate and what you're not. It's saying, I love you unconditionally, but I don't accept being treated with contempt. I'm here for you always, but I'm not going to allow my presence to be taken for granted. You can count on me, but I also need you to respect my dignity as a person. For years, perhaps decades, your only strategy was to be available without conditions. You accepted prolonged silences, cold conversations, obligatory visits, calls only when they needed something, and you justified everything thinking, at least I have some contact with my child. But that's not a healthy relationship. It's a dynamic of emotional wear. Setting a boundary can be as simple as stopping calling when you're always the one who initiates contact. It can be stopping asking how they are when they never ask you the same question. It can be not being automatically available every time they need something, especially if in day-to-day life they ignore you. This doesn't mean cutting off the relationship. It means balancing it. It means stopping being the only one sustaining a bond, because a real relationship requires mutual effort. And if only one person is investing emotional energy, then there's no relationship. There's unilateral dependence. Guilt will appear, of course. You'll tell yourself that you're selfish, that you're abandoning your child, that a real parent doesn't set conditions, but those thoughts are the result of years of emotional conditioning. The reality is that setting boundaries is a way of teaching others how to treat you, and if you don't do it, nobody else will. Seventh, releasing expectations. When love frees itself from results. One of the deepest sources of suffering in family relationships is unmet expectations. That silent hope that someday your child will recognize everything you did for them, that at some point they'll say thank you, that they'll finally understand the magnitude of your love and sacrifice. But those expectations, as legitimate as they may seem, can become emotional chains that keep you prisoner to a future that may never arrive. Each day that passes without that recognition accumulates like an emotional debt that isn't settled, leaving you with a growing sensation of abandonment and disappointment. Here's a difficult truth to digest. When love becomes an expectation of return, it stops being pure love and transforms into an emotional contract, a contract that the other person never consciously signed, but that you silently collect on every time you don't receive what you expect. It's unfair. I understand. After so many years of dedication, you feel you have the right to expect gratitude, recognition, reciprocated affection, and emotionally that right exists. But psychologically, that expectation can become a trap that keeps you waiting indefinitely. Authentic love isn't a transaction, it's a free choice, and that choice must be born from the other person's freedom, not from your need. If your child shows you affection because they feel guilty, it's not real love. If they approach out of social or family obligation, it's not a genuine connection. Inner peace arrives when you can say, I gave the best of myself with sincere love. Now their response no longer defines my value or my tranquility. It's stopping living in expectation and starting to live inhabiting your present fully and in peace, even if it hurts, even if there's no perfectly closed ending. Releasing expectations isn't giving up. It's freeing yourself. It's recovering the emotional space you had mortgaged, waiting for recognition that may never come. And in that recovered space, you can return to finding yourself, rediscover who you are beyond your role as father or mother. Eighth, rediscovering your identity. Who are you beyond being a parent? When the relationship with an adult child becomes distant or painful, a fundamental question arises that many parents fear facing. Who am I beyond my parental role? For decades, your identity was organized completely around caring for, protecting, guiding, and sustaining your children. It was noble, it was admirable, but it also may have been limiting. Being a father or mother is a beautiful and important part of your story, but it cannot be your entire story. Before assuming that role, you were a person with dreams, passions, interests, curiosities that perhaps were suspended while you dedicated yourself completely to raising children. Now, when your child's silence occupies too much space in your day, when their coldness generates more pain than the joys of your present, it's time to turn your gaze inward, not to blame yourself for anything, but to reconnect with parts of yourself that fell asleep. Recovering yourself isn't selfishness, it's emotional survival. It means asking yourself, what did I like to do when nobody needed me? What made me feel alive and valuable as an individual? What were my dreams before all my energy was channeled toward family? Perhaps at first the answers won't come easily. After so many years living for others, it's possible you've disconnected from your own desires and needs. But that initial emptiness isn't a tragedy, it's an opportunity. The opportunity to rediscover yourself, to reconnect with aspects of your personality that had been paused. You don't need your child to call you to feel complete. You don't need their embrace to have a good day. You desire it, of course, but it's not essential for your well-being. What's essential is that you begin to treat yourself with the same tenderness and dedication that for years you directed exclusively toward others. Becoming a complete person again isn't a betrayal of the love you gave your children. It's an act of justice toward yourself, because nobody can live healthily in function of another person without paying a very high emotional price, and you've already paid too much. Now it's time to invest in your own well-being, to recover what you postponed, to stop looking at a closed door waiting for it to open and start opening your own doors. Ninth, mature love knows when to let go. There exists an abysmal difference between youthful love and mature love. The first is impulsive, absolute, blind. It believes that loving means giving everything, even personal dignity if necessary. But mature love has learned something fundamental, that not everything can be saved with affection, that there are relational dynamics that if they don't change, only generate mutual wear. Mature love recognizes boundaries, understands that there are silences that aren't temporary pauses, but definitive decisions. It comprehends that waiting indefinitely can be an elegant way of refusing to accept reality. And most importantly, it knows that loving doesn't mean clinging, but sometimes knowing when to let go. Letting go isn't abandonment. It's not coldness, it's not revenge, it's respect. Respect for the other's autonomy, even when that autonomy takes them far from you. And also respect for yourself, for your right not to live depending on another person's effective decision. When your child returns, if they return, may it be because they choose to do so, not because they feel guilt or obligation. May it be because they find in you a free presence, not a desperate figure waiting for crumbs of affection. And if they don't return, may your life not stop waiting for them, because what you gave, what you were as a father or mother, remains valuable regardless of their response. This form of love requires extraordinary inner strength. It means being able to say, I love you enough to let you be free, even if that freedom takes you away from me. It's the purest love that exists because it's not contaminated by fear, need, or control. Letting go doesn't mean cutting emotional ties. It means freeing the relationship from suffocating expectations. It's transforming love into a bridge that can be crossed or not, but where you're no longer on the other side begging them to cross it. You're on your own path, walking, living, breathing, complete and at peace. 10th, finding peace in your own value. There are silences that weigh more than the harshest words. There are absences that not only hurt, but seem to rewrite the entire emotional history of a family. Facing that absence, it's natural to wonder if everything you did was worth it, if you were good enough, if there's something in you that didn't deserve love. But those questions, although understandable, arise from a deep wound. The need for the other person to confirm that we had value, that we were important, that we deserve to be loved. And therein lies the fundamental problem. You've placed your self-esteem in someone else's hands. Your value as a person cannot be a reflection in your child's eyes, because if it is, then you live at the mercy of their gaze, their approval, their presence, and that places you in a position of extreme fragility. Every gesture of coldness becomes a threat to your identity. Every day without contact transforms into a confirmation of your supposed lack of importance. But there's a liberating truth that you need to internalize deeply. Your value doesn't need witnesses. Your story, your dedication, your love, your sacrifices, all of that exists and has meaning independently of whether someone recognizes it or not. You're not less important because your child doesn't tell you so. You don't lose your dignity because someone doesn't see it. The day you understand this, something fundamental changes inside you. You become stronger, more serene, more authentic. And paradoxically, from that place of inner strength, you can love better because you no longer love to be seen, but because it's part of your nature. Many parents live trapped in the romantic and dangerous idea that love can do everything, that if you love enough, the other will change, will understand, will return. But that's not mature love. It's illusion. Mature love accepts reality as it is, not as we would like it to be. Real emotional growth arrives when you allow yourself to release the myth of omnipotent love and begin to build a more loving and honest relationship with yourself. A relationship that doesn't depend on whether your child returns or not, because you've already returned to yourself. There comes an almost imperceptible moment when something inside you clicks. It's not a great revelation, just the understanding that your value doesn't depend on others' gratitude. You don't need an "I love you," a recognition, or a pending embrace to live in peace. Of course you desire it, but your integrity no longer rests on what another gives or doesn't give. That's the true transformation. Stopping searching outside for what can only be born from within. Then, you no longer love from lack, but from fullness. If your child returns, they'll do so by genuine choice. And if not, you'll still be at peace, living with dignity. In the end, maturing emotionally isn't about stopping loving, but learning to do it with balance and respect toward yourself, because you matter too.